Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. My name is Dr. Leigh Weisz. I am a child psychologist, and I run a group practice here in Northbrook called Coping Partners. I'm also the parent of two kids, ages 12 and 14, so I'm very much in this with you. So I spend my days working with kids and families, and what I see over and over again is that parents today are trying really hard. So in terms of our agenda, sometimes I know I leave presentations feeling overwhelmed by all the things that I'm not doing right, all the ways I must be getting it wrong. And my goal today is for you to leave here feeling empowered with one or two specific goals in mind of how you might shift some of your parenting practices. We are raising kids in a time that is incredibly intense. There is just more information, more comparison, more activities, more expectations, more pressure on parents in general to get it right. So if you are ever feeling stressed or overwhelmed, you're not alone. In fact, in 2024, the US Surgeon General issued an advisory on the mental well-being of parents. They described this like an epidemic, right? And the majority of parents really do feel burned out and exhausted. Some of the many reasons why parents might feel more stress: we don't get much of a break. We're always connected to our kids with technology, even during the school day. We know parents experience a lot of stress around how to navigate technology, especially as we learn more about the real harms, for example, of social media. And yet we also know its prevalence in our kids' lives. Parents feel more isolated, and also just the way in which affluent communities offer so much in the way of these structured extracurricular activities. I think most of us are pretty overscheduled, and so parents are just more stressed with logistics, carpools, dinner at different times, not to mention their own work stress and work schedules. So today, I really want to step back and ask a really important question, which is, what really matters? What actually matters in the long run? All parents, I believe, share an innate desire for their kids to be kind, empathetic, and caring. But we live in a world today where parents also feel an immense amount of pressure to provide their children with every competitive advantage in academics, in sports, even in their social lives. And so what's happening more and more is that fundamental values are being lost as parents lose sight of what's really important. And I want you to leave here today with 3 take-home messages and ways to implement them, with the goal of teaching your child how to be kind, resilient, and autonomous. And just by being here, you've taken the first step and should feel really good about wanting to instill these values in your children. Because when researchers ask parents what they most want for their kids, we say things like kindness, happiness, resilience, being a good person, raising a good human being, right? But when you ask kids what they think parents value most, they'll say things like achievement, performance, success. So there's clearly a gap between what we say matters and what most of our kids are actually experiencing. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is like, how do we close that gap? How do we raise kids who are not just successful, but like more importantly, kind, grounded, capable? So I want you to look and see, are these aligned? Most parents say it's important to them to raise a child who is kind, connected to others, resilient, and capable. That's not to say that parents don't also want their kids to have a good education or academic success. It's just typically not ranked by parents above these other core values. But if you look at the day-to-day reality and the things we value most, they don't look so aligned. I want you to take a minute and think about all the activities that fill your child's week. I'm sure for many, these activities could be basketball, dance class, soccer, art, academics. And while these are all wonderful, enriching activities, and my own kids are right there in those activities with yours, it does raise the question, like, where do we fit teaching kindness in our busy schedules? This is a chart from the book Dopamine Kids, written by Michaeline Duclef. And by the end of today's Lunch and Learn, I want you to choose one top value or goal that you have for your kids and a corresponding behavior or two that supports that goal. I'm going to give you a few examples now, but if you can get a piece of paper, a pen or a pencil, and just jot down throughout this presentation some ideas for you of the values and the behaviors that, you'd like to implement. I'm going to go back to this at the end. So here's an example. Most parents want their children to be happy. Relationships, we know, are the #1 predictor of long-term well-being and happiness. We know that kids with strong social connections show all kinds of positive things like higher life satisfaction, lower anxiety, and lower depression. We know that warm, supportive relationships predict long-term happiness and health. So, in a behavior that we might implement as parents on the daily to promote our value of connection and happiness would be doing something that connects us with our kids, makes them feel connected. So, reading books at bedtime while snuggling up nightly for sure would do the trick, right? Which is different than saying to your kid, here's the iPad, have your wind down time, before bed. By the way, I should say, I do not ever intend to iPad shame. Everyone I know, myself included, has a time and a place where we do need to have something like the iPad. We cannot be there every second of every day. And every family is going to do it differently. But in terms of the behavior that promotes the value, this is an example. So you see of like what would promote connection and what wouldn't. And so how you implement this in your family is entirely up to you. What times of the day you can really foster connection, but the goal is to do it and to figure out a regular time that it's happening. If you have older kids who might not want to snuggle with you at bedtime anymore, this might be listening to music in the car together and bonding in this kind of more age-appropriate way, rather than if your teen normally sits and checks their phone during the car ride, you might say like, we're going to make a new rule, phone off in the car. And over time, they just get used to that, but then they're bonding because they're actually listening to music or talking, connecting. This slide shows another example of an aligned value and parental behavior. So again, a value might be kindness, and the related behavior would be involving your child in a helping behavior daily, like setting the table, helping to make a meal, or regularly volunteering somewhere. If it's important, there should be a behavior or an activity we see showing up daily, weekly, regularly. Now, I'm going to give you an example from my own life. As a psychologist, I know all about the importance of cultivating gratitude and how wonderful that is for mental health. So it was always important to me to cultivate gratitude in my kids and that they give back to others. So I decided I should put the goal of volunteering with the kids in my calendar monthly on repeat, just to keep it top of mind. The reality was that because of busy schedules, both ours and the kids, we didn't actually act on it for maybe 6 months. But because it stayed on my calendar, it remained visible and important, and eventually we did follow through. And we found different ways to volunteer as a family once a month. So a practical takeaway is if something matters to you, schedule it, even if you're not ready to act on it immediately, or write it down somewhere. Keeping it visible increases the likelihood that it'll eventually become reality. And I'm very proud. My older daughter is on a leadership service board and really does this because she loves it. She loves the feeling of giving back to others. So we've talked about, what gets in the way of promoting these wonderful core values and what actually matters. So I'm going to share with you now 3 key ways in which we can raise kind and grounded kids. Here's another easy behavior you can implement is like involving your child with pet care. So even a little kid can notice if like the water bowl is empty, and you can be like, hey, and give you the water bowl. Why don't you fill this for the dog's name? Or if the dog's bringing the ball to the child, like, hey, why don't you throw it and get some exercise? So the idea that there's little ways to implement this, you just want to kind of like notice it, and instead of just doing it yourself, ask them to help. So everything we're going to talk about today really comes down to 3 things: what we model, how we involve them, and how much space we give them to grow. So number 1 is model what matters. Kids are constantly watching us even when we don't realize it. If they see us, for example, regularly on our cell phones, they begin to view that behavior as normal and important, and they're going to imitate what they observe. So even at a really young age, they start engaging in the ways they see their parents behaving. I have a friend who has a mouth that you can imagine. She's a doctor. She's super poised and professional at work, but at home, she swears left and right. And her daughter, at the age of 3, repeated some of her choice words at a family barbecue. And we were all just hysterically laughing. And while my friend wanted to hide under the table, we knew and she knew that her daughter had mimicked her and she was caught. Needless to say, she worked on that habit of hers. So again, we have to model what matters. What we do consistently becomes what they value. So for example, if you're taking time with a friend on the phone, listening and trying to help her, explain later to your child, like, why were you taking the time out of your busy night to help a friend? Or a lot of families do highs and lows, best part of your day, worst part of your day, which is great. But you might add in questions that incorporate teaching empathy and kindness, like, what was one nice thing you did for someone else today? And everyone goes around the table and answers that. You can model writing notes of gratitude just because, like, there's always someone they can find to thank for something and show appreciation. Make your child write thank you notes, or you write them yourself too, or send thank you videos, even though sometimes it's a pain in the neck. It's nice to acknowledge people around you. So again, if you do this with your kids, if you model this, they're gonna, at the end of the day, understand that this is of value. We ask questions all the time about how did you do on the test? Did you score any points in basketball today? But we also want to notice the questions we're asking. And again, what value is it getting at? So if our value is kindness, we might ask questions like, what did you do that helped someone else today? How do you think that made them feel? Or if you know that a child is struggling, you might ask, is there someone you could check on? How could you make the situation better? If you know a friend is left out in a situation, you might ask, how did you handle that when so-and-so was left out? Or even later, to acknowledge a positive response you noticed if they did something nice, like, you are a person who thinks about others' feelings after they tell you some story where they did something kind. This then reinforces this part of their identity, which we want to grow and instill. If the value that you're trying to instill in your kids is gratitude, then think about the questions that would help model or instill gratitude. So you might ask every night for the kids before bed, what is something you felt thankful for today? If the value was to instill resilience, you might ask, was there something hard or uncomfortable that you stuck with today? Again, that question makes them think about grit and resilience. So what we ask matters. Be mindful that kids learn by watching us. Our kids learn best by watching us all in action. And again, that's why the kids have play cell phones and wear makeup when they're really, really little in their play. And this also goes for how we treat others. They're watching, not just your best pals, but also those in the community at large. So smile and say hello to your neighbors. Offer to help an elderly woman load groceries into their trunk. Let someone go ahead of you in line who has just a couple of items. Hold the door open for a mom pushing the stroller. And if you have a younger child, you could even connect your behavior once in a while for your kids to understand, like, I held the door because it's important to be thoughtful of others, right? You're not going to do that every single time, but it's okay to make that connection when they're little once in a while. Again, we want to model what matters to us. Find time to regularly watch videos that show kids how awesome it is to be kind. You might say something like, someone shared this amazing video with me. Let's watch it together tonight, right? And they see that if you search for these kinds of things, there are millions of heartwarming stories of kindness, empathy, and compassion. This is a good example. On the screen, you see a screenshot of, it's called Kindness 101, and it's a series on CBS News. And that would be an awesome thing to watch with your kids to show that kindness matters to you. If along with the many junky TV shows our kids watch, we watch this kind together too. In this Kindness 101 series, one episode talks about how good deeds domino. And one example in this episode was a man who anonymously donated $100 bills to a pharmacy for people who couldn't afford their prescriptions. And it turned out that this person who was donating was incredibly generous, but not incredibly wealthy. And When he passed away, they did some story on him, and his kindness basically was contagious, and his generosity dominoed into a global movement where other people then, in turn, began donating to pharmacies for this same cause. So, how cool and uplifting to share that kind of an anecdote with your kid or to watch it together. So, the second way we can raise kind and grounded kids is let them contribute. This photo always makes me laugh because I often joke with my other mom friends that our kids have pretty good lives, which I wouldn't change, of course, but I also think that sometimes our kids need to get their hands dirty and work hard too. And so while I'm glad that our kids have the roofs over their heads and fun, enriching childhood experiences, we can't underestimate the value of hard work. So let's talk about what it means to let them contribute. I hope it's not just me, but sometimes I will be across the room and my kiddo will be much nearer to the silverware drawer. But nonetheless, my kiddo will ask me to get her a fork instead of getting it for herself. It seems small, but these are opportunities to build responsibility and independence. In the olden days and in certain rural or less affluent communities, helping out at home was not a question, it was a necessity. So, milking cows, gathering eggs that the hens had laid, and hauling fresh water were actually necessary for survival and to put dinner on the table each night. And in lower socioeconomic areas, working to support one's family or taking care of younger siblings on the daily is still an expectation. Here, however, in affluent areas and in modern day where we have groceries delivered to our house in an hour, survival does not require as much hard work. And so while we're grateful for these conveniences, we also can't lose sight of the values and the lessons learned when everyone in the family contributes to the running of our households. I have a favorite comedian. His name is Ronnie Chang, and he has a whole bit on Amazon Prime. And he pokes fun at the American way. He jokes that no item is too trivial, and we never have to even leave our houses. He jokes that we have now Prime Now, even 2 hour delivery. And the punchline is, let's get Prime before, he says. Send it to me before I even want it, before I know I want it. I highly recommend you watch that. So we have a lot of ways, basically, to get what we need without the help of our kids. And sadly, they don't learn naturally to help if our new normal is this way: Instacart, Amazon Prime, and DoorDash, other luxuries. And so if they don't have to help to make sure our house runs smoothly, we need to make sure they're not just getting a free pass. It is always easier for me, at least, to clean up the dishes from dinner rather than teach the kids how to rinse it off and put it in the dishwasher and make sure they do it. It is always easier to clean up the playroom of the toys when the kids are little ourselves than to sit with them and help them to do it and monitor that they're doing it. But of course, we want them to learn how to do this and to build up this hard work muscle. I read a great book this year called Hunt, Gather, Parent by Michaeline Duclaff, where she explores parenting practices from Indigenous communities, including Maya, Inuit, and Hadzabe families. In many non-Western cultures around the world, children naturally become helpful, cooperative, and intrinsically motivated members of their family from a young age. A key concept she speaks about in this book is, in Spanish, acomedido, which roughly translates to helpfulness. And it refers to a child who notices what needs to be done and helps without being asked. Amazing, right? In action, this would look like a kid seeing that dishes are piled high in the sink and without being asked or bribed or nagged, just automatically helps the family by loading the dishwasher. So remember at the beginning of this talk, I said I did not want anyone to leave here feeling badly about their parenting. So this book was wild in that her examples sounded to me almost make-believe. And I do think there are real cultural differences to how children are raised. For example, I do not anticipate the kiddos here doing what the author observed in one of the cultures she visited in Mexico, where toddlers were using real knives and even small machetes to prepare vegetables and assist with outdoor work. I remember thinking, okay, we are not doing that. I sometimes wonder if I can even trust my kids with a butter knife. But we can still learn a great deal from these cultures where being helpful is both valued and practiced daily. We can learn from generations of people who engage their children in the work of the family rather than sending them off to play while they did the work. A simple way to begin expecting more hard work from your children is through regular chores. Start slowly. Introduce maybe 1 or 2 age-appropriate tasks. For young children, this may be putting their toys away. For elementary school kids, this might be helping to set the table. For tweens, it might be loading and unloading the dishwasher. For teens, it could be doing their own laundry or preparing a simple meal. Not only does this teach your kids skills that they'll need for daily living, but they also learn that they have a role in the family. They are part of something greater than themselves. And in turn, this makes a child feel effective, instilling purpose and confidence. So if we start by giving kids a template for helping each other in the family, right, the little mini community, it eventually generalizes to the larger community, like maybe their school, and ultimately the bigger community. So ideally, we don't just assign individualistic chores, which might be clearing their own plate, but helping other members of the family. So it might be like setting the table for everyone or clearing the whole table or organizing the whole mudroom, not just keeping their shoes in their, appropriate cubby. Contribution creates confidence. So let them contribute to the running of the household. This is what it looks like to let them contribute. This is not the same as having the child play in their toy kitchen while you cook. There's nothing wrong with children using make-believe play. I'm a big proponent of play. But I'm talking in this situation about truly inviting your child into the kitchen with you to stir something or to roll out dough, even if it's not perfect, because then they feel that membership into our family. They feel a sense of belonging and they're learning real skills at the same time. And this could be starting like something really small, like making rice in a rice cooker. A child can measure the water, pour it in, measure the rice, pour it in, and push the start button. And in less than 5 minutes, it's a simple task. They feel like they helped make dinner and take pride in contributing. And the next time they can probably do it by themselves or after a few practices. So what gets in the way? Honestly, I think shorter term, like we said, it is much easier to just tell kids to go play while we do the work, while we clean up the mess and cook the dinner and tend to the to-dos, rather than inviting them in. The culture we live in, as we discussed, is pretty busy and pretty overscheduled. So sometimes we just lack proper time to devote to this. And we focus, I would say, too much in this culture on outcome and less on process. So I'll get to an example where you can see what I mean. My kids love a breakfast that we call eggy in the nest. Basically, you cut a hole in the middle of a piece of toast or a piece of bread. You fry the bread in a pan on the stove. You crack the egg in the hole, and then you flip it over. So when I engaged my daughter in helping to teach her how to make this with me, I noticed that she cracked the egg from way too high and it splattered all over rather than landing neatly in the hole. Immediately, I corrected her in the moment because in the moment I was really stuck that my job was to teach her the proper way to make this breakfast so she'd know, right? You can imagine what happened. It totally backfired. She did not want to cook with me the next day. And we have to remember, and I remembered since then, the goal in these interactions is not that they cook a perfect dish, certainly not the first time, but that they have a meaningful experience where they feel a connection to you as the parent and they want to be helpful and join in the family work again and again. Sometimes kids are too young to actually do any of the cooking, but even if they're being invited to watch and they're in our space, maybe they're coloring and watching as you narrate what they're doing, we're still nurturing this helping part of them. So again, we have to think about short-term versus long-term, what we are accomplishing. So the idea, come help me cook, harder in the short term, easier to say, go play while I get dinner on the table. But in the short term, if we spend more time redoing their work, like maybe we, teach them how to use a dustpan and a broom and we have to like redo it ourselves because they missed half the crumbs. Even if it doesn't get cleaned up the right way, in the long term, you have a helper and someone competent in their young adulthood rather than someone who learns that we leave work to adults and we go play, or we go do our homework, or we go to our extracurricular activity. They learn that they have ownership in helping the family run smoothly. I have college kids that I work with who are unbelievably smart and great academically. Often they're at Ivy League schools, but they flail under the stressors of life skills that they lack when they go away to college. They don't know how to do their laundry. They don't know how to cook basic meals when they're in an apartment or how to call and schedule a doctor's appointment. Their parents have done all of this for them, and now they're not only learning how to be away from home for the first time, which is hard at first, but they're also lacking in these daily living skills. The same goes for emotional regulation skills. They may fall apart at the first B they have ever gotten at this Ivy League school because they haven't had much practice coping with disappointment, or their parents have really bolstered them over the years by emailing teachers on their behalf and so forth, and avoiding the upset. The third way to raise kind and grounded kids is to step back so they can grow. These young adults who I'm describing at the Ivy League schools, I want you to know they are not alone in their struggles. Kids today are just lacking in real world experiences that help them gain skills they'll need for their lives, in part because they're spending so much more time in these structured activities and so much more time in a digital world, and less of this free time learning, growing, and exploring in the real world. And this is exactly what Jonathan Haidt, author of the Anxious Generation book, has been studying: how the shift from real world childhood to screen-based childhood is impacting kids' mental health. Jonathan Haidt calls this the great rewiring of childhood, a shift from play-based real-world experiences to phone-based screen-centered ones. And I should give a shout out to Catch here. Dr. Lisa Novak gave an incredible talk on this book and how we could, understand how to implement some of these lessons in our community and in our real world. And I would say it's been something that we continue to talk about at many Catch discussion groups. So if you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it, although it is lengthy. The premise of this book is more real world should be the goal and less screen world. The goal for kids and teens is to have more face-to-face interactions with family and friends. And when kids spend less time on the screens, they're spending that same time in their real world relationships, right? We only have so much time in a day. So while in a perfect world, I would love to, say no screens is my recommendation, I understand that this is not realistic for most families, and that is totally okay. I want you to instead continue to set smaller goals in regards to less screen time in your home that promotes healthy change. However you implement this is up to you, and there's no one size fits all way to implement this. So I don't want this to make you feel guilty. But for example, this might be screen-free meal times. That's a rule in the house. We do not bring phones to the table, right? Breakfast, lunch, dinner, any meal. It might be we do not use the phone in the car, right? That is a screen-free space. Make small changes that work for your family. What's going to happen is kids are going to obviously feel more connected, have more of these real world experiences, face-to-face interactions. They might also experience being bored and see what amazing things come from that too. Lenore Skenazy, who's a journalist and an author of the book Free Range Kids, founded a nonprofit called Let Grow, which is focused on building independence in children. Let Grow is really about giving kids opportunities to build confidence through these real world experiences, trying things, figuring things out, gaining independence. When kids contribute at home, they start to feel capable, like they matter, like they can do real things. But even when kids feel capable, often we step in as parents and do things for them that we shouldn't do. So again, we need to give kids the space to struggle, to try, to figure things out, and we really need to step back so they can grow. That's where the growth happens. So the Let Grow movement encourages parents to let kids take more risks, be more independent, essentially do things on their own, like walk home from school or go to the grocery store themselves, walk to a friend's house, make a meal for themselves, advocate for themselves by emailing a teacher or a coach rather than the parent doing it for them. There was a great reality TV show called Old Enough that took place in Japan from several years back that I remember loving. And it followed young children, like seriously, they might have been 2 to 6 years old approximately. So these kids who were like kindergarteners were sent on real errands alone buying groceries, delivering items, completing tasks for their families. It's hard to imagine, but they started early. And in this show, some kids walked surprisingly long distances, navigated complex routes, which is why it felt so striking to watch. But this is what independence feels like in action. The kids were sent to do these things like go to the local store, pick up 1 to 2 items from the grocery, pay and return with their items. They needed to not get distracted, know how to get there, remember to take the money and the items home. But boy, did they feel accomplished and helpful when they returned home. So, in order to raise resilient kids, we need to let them do more. So, let them walk, ride bikes further than you might be comfortable with at first. Let them cook a meal solo. Let them order their own food in a restaurant. Let them schedule their own doctor's appointments. Let them make their own lunch. Let them advocate for themselves with teachers and coaches. It does sound counterintuitive, but in order to raise a resilient adult, we do need to let kids experience setbacks and failures and accept that they're not going to be happy and successful every second of every day. We need, as parents, to let go of this hope, which is unrealistic, that every moment of every day is going to be smooth for them. We need to allow our children to experience life's ups and downs, to fall and to fail, and to not be happy every second of every day. Let them experience uncomfortable emotions. We parents work so hard sometimes to shield them from disappointment and struggles and painful emotions. And instead, we need to allow them to experience the challenges as they naturally arise, which they will, instead of trying so hard to shield them. When we bubble wrap our kids now, picture on the left, it backfires. They end up with poor coping skills for their lives, which in turn usually results in more depression and anxiety later, right? The cartoon on the right, which I'll read to you, shows a young man, probably around, I would say, age 30, all swaddled up. And the father, I would imagine, on the left says, at some point we have to stop swaddling, right? So it just illustrates how, of course, as our kids get older, we need to give them more freedom to navigate through life themselves. Here's another example of what we're asking you to do. If your child auditioned for their first school play and they don't get the role they hoped for, again, part of life, do not allow them to drop out of the play. Instead, make sure they follow through on their commitment to be in the play and help them see that they can do the best they can in whatever small role they were given. This is an opportunity to teach your child how to cope with disappointment and learn that they will get through it. It also teaches the importance of being a part of something greater than yourself. You can't have a play without a chorus, right? So you're contributing to the whole production. You have permission to defeat your child in games. How many of us have sometimes let our child beat us in a game? Again, I relate. It's much easier to let your child win and be thrilled. And sometimes people want to prevent their children from experiencing that disappointment or that huge emotion and maybe having a major explosion or tantrum. But it's never too early to develop coping tools to deal with disappointment. So it's okay to beat your kiddo in a game of basketball or a board game sometimes. We are letting them, after all, experience real life. Many of us in our practice have clients who are kids who come in with issues around competition with peers, where they're hitting or kicking if they lose a game, or say the ref made an unfair call and storm off, rather than handling the disappointment in that moment around not winning the game, but powering through and knowing they can handle it. We personally don't have this struggle as much in my household because my husband is super competitive, so he just doesn't let our kids beat them. So give kids space to try things on their own. Stepping back as parents includes allowing kids more space to do things on their own. A big example of this would be overnight camp, but it could be as simple as a sleepover away from home. Any of these experiences where we're not right there with them foster resilience and confidence. Some of my clients with separation anxiety, for example, take iPads with them to sleepovers. It's kind of like a baby blanket where they know they can call their mom or dad if they struggle, ask them to pick them up early. Even just being able to say goodnight gives them some reassurance that they're kind of connected. And so often one of my challenges to them will be sleep at their friend's house. Again, a friend where they've slept a million times before, where they're comfortable with the parents and so forth. But this time, don't bring your iPad. So they don't have that constant feeling of connection to home, and they're not going to realistically ask to come home or get picked up early unless it was so bad that they had to use their voice and speak with the friend's parent. It pushes these kids to try harder to tolerate a normative feeling like homesickness and just push through. And again, what a great feeling when they know they did it and they could handle it. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves the greatest growth stems from uncomfortable moments. Without parents right on the scene as a crutch, kids naturally figure out how to do so much more on their own. So over the years, social psychologists have seen a shift in parenting practices. Partly, I would say, due to the misconception that the world is so much more unsafe than it used to be. Again, not true. But this different parenting style is something we've kind of grown accustomed to. And unfortunately, I think the bubble wrapping of our kids has backfired. We now have generations that are less equipped to handle not just true adversity, but even basic life skills. And that's why I do think we have so many calls in our practice for kids who are really struggling with emotional regulation. We just aren't allowing our kids to cope with the feelings that are part of life. And again, I don't say that in any judgmental way. I do feel like that urge to rescue too. I know where it comes from, and it always comes from a good place. I have clients, for example, who text their parents from the school bathroom when they're having a peer conflict, or if they get a disappointing grade on a test. The parents, before I kind of counsel them, might, again, best of intentions, immediately reply to the text something reassuring to their kiddo, like it'll be okay, or even coach their kid on how to handle the peer conflict, like all in the here and now moment when the kid's in the bathroom. So what kids actually learn from those interactions is that they need their parents to help them in the moment, and they start to lack confidence in their ability to handle these situations and emotions, which in turn creates a lot of anxiety. So again, when I would sit with these parents, I would say, I know it's hard, and I want you to let them handle the situation themselves, right? Maybe you have to do baby steps and give them an emoji like you got this, but that's it. And eventually nothing. Anytime though, when kids and parents are not connected with their devices, whether in town or away from home, these are the moments that provide growth opportunities for both children and parents. And we as parents also need to get more comfortable not having that constant reassurance that our kids are doing great all the time. We also need to let them have the school day, let's say, free of devices, which is supposed to be a rule, but depending on the school, it's not always implemented. Discomfort equals growth. I want you to look at this for a minute. Many of our kids are taught the growth mindset concept in schools from a really young age. And it's important for us parents to understand also that from discomfort comes growth. So in therapy, I often talk to the kids I work with about the difference between feeling uncomfortable and true danger signals. We are wired to survive. So when we feel a rush of anxiety in our bodies, we have to check in with ourselves, and we have to teach our kids the same skill to ask, are we in true danger, or are we just uncomfortable, right? Is there a saber-toothed lion actually chasing us, like true danger? Makes sense that my anxiety is up. Or are we just uncomfortable because we got a bad grade on a test? And if the answer is I'm just out of my comfort zone, I'm not feeling particularly comfortable, then I want you to reframe it for yourself as a parent and for your child as an opportunity for growth. When we try to shield our kids, we tend to hover. And when we hover, we are taking away true opportunities to grow. So when kids have to problem solve on their own, whether the middle school lunchroom drama or they need to talk to a teacher about eating an extension, they learn and they grow. When we jump in, we're depriving them of an opportunity. This image, which I'll read aloud in a moment, was from a Catholic high school for boys in Little Rock, Arkansas. The principal posted this sign, and it says, if you are dropping off your son's forgotten lunch, books, homework, equipment, etc., please turn around and exit the building. Your son will learn to problem solve in your absence. If you have a teenager who forgot their lunch one time, of course, it's okay to bring them their lunch to school. But if you have a teenager who forgets over and over again to bring their lunch, they're likely going to only learn the better habit through experiencing the natural consequence of feeling hungry. So it's okay if your child feels hungry for the last few hours of school, right? The hunger pains will not affect the overall health and well-being of your child, but they will serve as a reminder the next day and after that to put their lunch in their backpack before leaving the house. If you have younger kids, you might not feel quite as comfortable with this scenario because maybe your child's not old enough to pack his or her lunch. But if she forgets, let's say, her favorite water bottle at the park outing, she'll learn to cope with it and be okay and remember it for the next outing at the park. Remind yourself, remind your child, the goal is not to be happy all the time. Your children will be in uncomfortable positions, and we need to help kids practice feeling those feelings. I want you to think about a moment in your life or in your child's life when maybe something didn't go exactly their way or your way, but looking back, something good came of it. One of my kiddos was really into dance. She still dances, but she didn't make a team that she had auditioned for at the start of high school. Instead, she had to try a totally new sport, or she wanted to try a totally new sport versus doing nothing. In her case, she tried out for cross country. She turns out loves this sport, made incredible friends, and truly, I think, found a lifelong sport that she adores. Now, of course, she was disappointed at first, finding out she didn't make this team. But looking back, she managed that feeling and she learned such an important life lesson that life throws us curveballs, but often leads us down another good, maybe even better path. So we all have times in our life where we felt disappointment, sadness, frustration, but after we tolerated those feelings, ultimately we benefited because we made the best of a situation. We had a positive outlook, and again, usually good things follow, right? So if you parents intervene and call the school or other parents or the coach of the sports team, you're sending a message to your child that you don't have confidence that they can handle the situation, and you're taking a true opportunity away for growth. Again, this is how kids learn emotional regulation. So the bottom line is, if you remember nothing else, we don't need to do more as parents. We often need to do less and trust that our kids are more capable than we think. So when we model what matters, when we let them contribute, and when we step back so they can grow, that is how we raise kids who are not just successful, but grounded, capable, and kind. I want you to notice the slide. These are all amazing parenting books that I highly recommend, much of which are incorporated into this talk. And feel free to take a picture or look back later on at the recording, but I would really highly suggest all of these books. And I discuss many of these parenting topics in more depth on the Coping podcast, where I interview guests and experts on parenting, child development, and challenging issues for parents to navigate. So please tune in if you want to hear more of any of these topics. The Coping podcast is on the Coping Partners website, but it's also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all the places where you can find the podcasts that you listen to. And now finally, I'd like you to take out a pen and paper and just jot down at least one, more if you want, values or goals, and a corresponding behavior you want to promote that will be in the support of that value or goal. And if you make this one change, that's an amazing start. And then if you extrapolate this for years to come, you're basically planting a seed and watching it grow. My hope is that this feels helpful and doable. I really want to thank you for taking the time with us today to reflect together on what's most important. So I'm happy to open it up now to any questions from our participants. And after the lunch and learn, if you have any other questions, feel free to take a photo of this screen so you can have my contact information for other questions in the future. Email me at info@drleighweisz.com with questions absolutely anytime. Do not hesitate.
raising older teens and trying to figure out this balance. Are there some strategies to, as you transition from raising kids to raising adults?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would say the all of the same principles hold true. It's about scaffolding, so figuring out where they are in their development. So if your child is like actually about to go to college, I would do a little quick survey, mental survey of like what skills do they have? I'm sure they do have plenty. And where are they kind of like missing certain key skills? And again, you can even have them help you. Like, we're not going to do this all at once, but what's something you hope to be doing in college that you're not doing quite yet, or wherever they're going to be in the world after high school, whatever they're doing, and just helping them. I had, a client who was like, not
Helping them by not helping them.
right, right, sorry, helping them to like work up their ladder, let's say, of these skills. So let's say they're not calling and scheduling their own doctor's appointments quite yet because you just like, you always did it. You're very organized mom or dad, and, it was no big deal. You might say, oh, I kind of like enjoy that role, but I'm not really serving my kid in this way because he or she needs to be doing this. So I'm going to say from now on, honey, this is on you, and I might again coach from the sidelines at first and be like, okay, reminder, it's been 6 months. You got to make your next dentist appointment. And like, again, at first that's okay. Then you might help them. How do they put it in their calendar that every 6 months they have their own reminder in their own system? But you just can't do it all at once. So I don't want you to feel overwhelmed like, oh, shoot, I missed the boat. It's too late. Not at all. There's kids in their 30s and 40s who are still working on adulting. And there's whole books on this topic because it's truly something that a lot of these young adults are struggling with.
One of the things that I tried to think about was, as my kids are older, is to try to figure out how to teach the skill in a way so that like they sat with me when I called to make the appointment, and then the next appointment they had to call. I still reminded them they needed to call, but then they called
Yes,
themselves and then scheduled themselves and showed up themselves and all of those things. But
exactly. You
trying
can't
to
expect them to do
scale
it all
it,
at once.
yeah. If I start pulling back and letting my child struggle more, how do I know when I'm supporting growth versus when I'm letting them get too overwhelmed or feel unsupported?
Again, a great question. And I wish there was like a easy, cookie cutter way for me to tell you. It really depends on the child, right? But I think if they don't feel any discomfort or any like anxiety, then, they're probably not being pushed quite enough, right? You kind of have to make them feel a little uncomfortable to grow. But like you said, if it's too much too fast and your child is like truly overwhelmed and melting down and hysterical, then you might have to do what Rachel is talking about and like break it down into smaller little baby steps and say, okay, that was too much. Let's like take it down a notch. But again, you can do that with almost anything. You can break it down and sort of have them do a little more than they were doing before. But you need to know what they were doing before to be able to know where you're pushing them. So if your child has no idea what they're doing, like in the kitchen, right? And you're like, oh, I need him to know how to cook by next, by 2 months from now because they're going away, right? That's not realistic. So you might start really basic. If you have a child who's seen you cooking their whole lives, then of course you kind of know like, okay, this is the next step. So it really does depend on your situation. And the key is not to feel badly about something you haven't done yet, just to kind of be mindful and have conversations with your young adult or soon to be young adult about like, what should we work on?
Yeah, what are their priorities of what they want to,
And
what
there's a
skills
really
do they
good
need to
book.
learn?
Sorry, there's a really good book by Julie Lythcott-Haims that's actually geared toward the young adult, if anyone has young adults. And it's basically the adulting book for them, whereas she wrote the How to Raise a Young Adult for Parents. So that might be something interesting to look at too.
I've heard that book is very good. What do you do if like the two parents are not necessarily aligned in terms of their style and they come from different backgrounds with different knowledge levels about child rearing? How do you try to become more aligned? And is that, or do you need to be more aligned?
So that's a great question, also, and very, very common. In fact, more common than not, that two parents come together raising kids with very, very different backgrounds, whether that's family of origin, whether that's like personality style, whether that's, their knowledge of child development, right? All kinds of differences. And I don't think they need to be doing things exactly the same way. I think a good place to start is to kind of like reflect on the shared values. So ideally, if parents are at least on the same page about that helps. And I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a seventh grade child who forgets their homework at school and is texting you from the bathroom, hysterical, like, I forgot, I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to get points off. And I'm going to be a little gender stereotypical here, but let's say the mother is a little bit more nurturing and soft, not always the case, of course. And she says, okay, I'm going to run over to the school, sweetie, and bring you the homework. Don't worry, I got it. And maybe the dad says, no, they're not going to learn. Like, stop answering your phone and like let them figure it out the hard way. So more of that traditionally tough love kind of approach. What the truth is again, there's no right or wrong. You kind of need a balance of both. So I would say something to these parents if they were in my office, like, we need the support and the empathy. This person is struggling. This kiddo is struggling. So saying something really quick, like, I know, sweetie, it's hard, and you'll turn it in tomorrow and you'll talk to the teacher. It'll be okay. That would be a first step. Eventually, if this is a pattern, you would not want to respond to the text at all. But for a first thing, that would be okay, but not to rush over with the assignment. You're on the same page. Like the kid is still going to have to talk to the teacher themselves. They're still going to have the natural consequence the next day of turning in the assignment late, but you're kind of balancing that support and empathy piece, which kids need, with the pushing them piece, which is like saying, I have confidence you can handle this, right? That vote
Mhm.
of, you got this, which they also need. So that's kind of more of that tough love. And you really need both.
When my kids were younger, the principal back in the day when we used to get paper newsletters from school, the principal used to share excerpts from a book that I loved called Parenting with Love and Logic. And this is obviously this is a very long time ago, and it still stuck with me, but it was along a lot of a framework of, yeah, let your kids take the steps, let them do what they need to do so that they can experience discomfort and know that when they leave your house, they can experience discomfort and do that on their own. And things like that. I thought of that book when I saw that graphic with the stop, go home, don't bring this
Yep.
stuff in here, don't
Yep.
drop off the lunch, because it was so much along the lines of what they taught in this book. It was really nice.
And one more thought about that last question. We have
Mhm.
parents who come to our office for what we call behind the scenes parenting work. So, these are high functioning kids and families, but parents want support. Again, parenting is really challenging and stressful. And so a therapist might sit with these parents, not that you need this, you could do it on your own too, but like there's nothing wrong with seeking support and say, I don't like how he or she handles these parenting situations. And you can kind of discuss ahead of time what you want to do so you can be on the same page. If there are predictable things where you're always not seeing eye to eye, right? It's usually like the same kind of issues. Again, and being respectful of each other. So if your spouse didn't do it exactly how you would, just being respectful of their choice, over time, a balance is going to be just fine.
Okay, that's great. All right, I think we have time for one more quick question. I think this will resonate with a lot of people. If my child is already anxious or perfectionistic, won't me stepping back make that worse?
I'm trying to think of an example of that. They're perfectionistic. Rachel, can you think of like what they
Well,
mean?
just think that like the experience of actually not having it be perfect and having
Uh,
things be okay is, I
uh,
think, this idea that like if they feel like everything has to be perfect, then they can get the message that like it doesn't have to be perfect, it has to be
yeah.
done, or
Yeah. So if
good
if the
is good
parent
enough.
So if the parent was helping to make the outcome perfect, I guess is maybe part of the question. That was what I was
Yeah.
clear on. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, first of all, my college kid who got a B example, I mean, this kid fell apart, emotionally was devastated, like almost dropped out of school, devastated. Right. And so I would say to the parent, let your child get the not perfect grade, right? Or go on stage and make a little mistake in their dance and know, like, learn the life lesson that It didn't feel great, don't get me wrong. I didn't love that feeling, but I could get through it. I could cope. That's emotional regulation, coping with those feelings. And so we want to give the kids the practice early on to cope and to know and to have the confidence that they can. If we never give them those experiences and it always looks perfect, yeah, like Rachel said, then they just really don't have those skills later on. So I would say, yes, we definitely want to help them. Again, we do have to be gradual in how quickly we step back. Like we can't just do this all or nothing overnight, but being really conscious about where we step back, how we step back, and even narrating to our kids, hey, honey, I want you to know I used to do XYZ for you, and I'm not going
Hmm.
to do that anymore. I don't think it's serving you anymore, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want you to think it's because I'm being mean. It's because I think you can do it. I know you can do it, even though it might feel hard at first.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Leigh. This was terrific. I hope that everybody took away something great from this. Certainly some great resources.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.